Trump-backed candidate wins Louisiana governor's race. Jeff Landry, who also had the endorsement of Representative Steve Scalise, Republican, Louisiana, received 52% of the vote, avoiding the need for a runoff. Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry, a Republican with strong ties to former President Donald Trump, won his state's gubernatorial race on Saturday night, a major victory for the GOP in a southern state that has been run by Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards for the last 8 years. Landry received nearly 52% of the votes among a crowded field of candidates in the state's open primary. Under this system, all candidates, regardless of party, run in the same election. If no candidate had received the majority of the vote, the two top candidates would compete in a runoff under Louisiana law. But because Landry did receive more than 50%, he fended off a second round and is Louisiana governor-elect. A staunch supporter of Trump and a hardline Republican, Landry ran his campaign on a tough-on-crime platform and has consistently pushed conservative policies in the state, including a ban on gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth and a near-total abortion ban. The state's contentious abortion ban has no exemptions for rape or incest. Landry also was among the 19 state attorneys general who signed a letter in June demanding that the Biden administration allow their offices access to information about residents who received gender-affirming or abortion care in other states. Edwards could not run again because of term limits. Democratic candidate and former Louisiana Transportation Secretary Shawn Wilson was the second finisher in the race, receiving slightly more than 25% of the vote, according to unofficial results from the Louisiana Secretary of State's office. While 7 other Republicans ran for the governor's office, Landry received Trump's endorsement in the race, as well as the backing of Representative Steve Scalise, Republican, Louisiana, a stalwart of Louisiana Republican politics. On Saturday, Landry, 52, thanked those who backed him, saying that his election is a sign that his state is united and it's a wake-up call. It's a message that everyone should hear loud and clear that we the people in this state are going to expect more out of our government from here on, he said. Edwards has clashed with Landry repeatedly on issues including LGBTQ rights and the death penalty. On Saturday night, Edwards congratulated his soon-to-be successor, adding that Landry ran a winning campaign focused on uniting the people of Louisiana across political and social divides and addressing important kitchen table issues. In my experience, that's the best way to govern, Edwards said in a statement. A smooth transition of power following an election is a core tenet of American democracy. My staff and I will ensure the incoming administration has every opportunity to be ready on day one. Landry has served as Louisiana Attorney General since 2016. Before that, he represented the state's 3rd district in the U.S. House of Representatives. Landry's win marks a major victory for the Republican Party, as it will now take back the governor's mansion in one of the few states in the Deep South run by Democrats. Edwards gained much national attention after his surprise victory in 2015 after 2 rounds in the gubernatorial race. Supreme Court seems inclined to reinstate disputed South Carolina map. The redrawn congressional map moved whites in and blacks out. But the legislature said those decisions focused on political party, not race. The Supreme Court on Wednesday seemed likely to reinstate a South Carolina congressional map drawn by the GOP majority legislature that a lower court found exiled 30,000 black voters to create a district safer for a white Republican incumbent. Just a few months ago, the justices found that Alabama had illegally drawn its congressional map to dilute the power of black voters. But on Wednesday, the question was whether South Carolina's new map, which moved black voters from one congressional district to another, was a permissible gerrymander to bolster the Republican majority or an unconstitutional attempt to sort voters by race. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., who wrote the Alabama decision last term, said disentangling race and politics in gerrymandering cases is very, very difficult when voting is polarized along both racial and political lines. Black voters and organizations challenging the South Carolina maps, he said, had no direct evidence that racial data, rather than political data, dominated. Have we ever had a case before where all it is circumstantial evidence? Roberts asked Leah C. Aden of the Legal Defense Fund, which is representing the challengers. He added, I'm not saying you can't get there, but it does seem that this would be breaking new ground in our voting rights jurisprudence. The case is one of several across the country in which courts are considering challenges to congressional redistricting plans, enough that their eventual rulings could play a large role in determining which party controls the U.S. House after the 2024 elections. In the Alabama case, Roberts and Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh joined the court's 3 liberals to form a majority, finding the state's plan violated the Voting Rights Act by not creating a second congressional district, out of 7 in the state, where black voters made up a large enough share of the electorate to have a strong chance of electing their candidate of choice. Tuesday's South Carolina case was in some sense the flip side of that decision, examining whether the maps violated the Constitution's bar on using race as an unjustified and predominant factor in drawing districts. A 3-judge panel in January said the map illegally split black neighborhoods in the Charleston area. Representative Nancy Mace, Republican, South Carolina, who had squeaked by her Democratic opponent in 2020, coasted to victory in 2022 in the redrawn district, keeping her seat in what has become the state's 6-1 Republican-dominated congressional delegation. The strategies ultimately exiled over 30,000 African American citizens from their previous district and created a stark racial gerrymander of Charleston County and the city of Charleston, said the panel of judges, 2 nominated by President Barack Obama and 1 by President Biden. The judges, quoting from testimony at trial, found that the changes were dramatic and created tremendous disparity in the placement of African Americans in 2 congressional districts, Mace's and the district represented by Representative James E. Clyburn, the assistant Democratic House leader. The judges found that South Carolina's mapmaker tried to keep the African American population below a certain target in Mace's district, treating Charleston County in a fundamentally different way than the rest of the state. Washington lawyer John M. Gore, representing South Carolina, said the lower court panel had made numerous missteps and one fundamental one. The legislature achieved its political goals by moving Republicans into the district and Democrats out of the district, Gore said. All of the direct evidence confirms that it used political data, not racial data, to identify Republicans and Democrats. The liberal justices said that just was not so. The lower court held a trial, weighed evidence, and judged the credibility of each side's experts, Justice Elena Kagan said. And the court said no, the evidence showed that you were doing race as a proxy for politics. Justice Sonia Sotomayor agreed, asking detailed questions about whether white Democrats were treated differently from black Democrats. The numbers are incredible, she said. Much of the hearing was focused on those types of specifics. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said the Supreme Court's role should be only to decide whether the lower court had made a clear legal error in its ruling. But conservative Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. said that was different from simply deferring to the lower court. Finding clear error is a very demanding standard, but it is not an impossible standard, Alito said. And it doesn't mean that we simply rubber stamp findings by a district court, particularly in a case like this, where we are the only court that is going to be reviewing those findings. Alito and Kavanaugh asked questions about the methodology of the experts and details about moving voters in certain neighborhoods from Mace's district to Clyburn's, and vice versa. Justice Neil M. Gorsuch questioned Justice Department lawyer Caroline A. Flynn, who supported the black challengers, about a passage in the government's brief that said it would have been plausible for the district court to have come to the exact opposite conclusion it came to here, meaning that race did not predominate. Kavanaugh followed up. You've looked at this record and you obviously concluded that the district court could have said no, that expert evidence is not sufficiently reliable or probative in light of the overall record to support the plaintiff's case, he asked. Well, we think that the expert evidence is a big part of it, Flynn responded. We think that there were credibility findings here that might have come out differently with a different 3-judge panel, possibly. It's kind of hard to tell, because we weren't there seeing the witnesses firsthand. The state has asked the justices to decide Alexander versus South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP by the end of the year because of the approaching 2024 primaries. Former IRS contractor pleads guilty to leaking Trump's tax returns. Charles Edward Littlejohn leaked thousands of tax returns from wealthy people, leading to exposés in the New York Times and ProPublica. A financial consultant who performed contract work for the IRS pleaded guilty Thursday to leaking reams of confidential tax returns filed by the wealthiest Americans, including those of then-President Donald Trump. Charles Edward Littlejohn, 38, admitted in D.C. federal court that he obtained thousands of individuals' tax returns by accessing an IRS database, and then leaked the materials to the New York Times and ProPublica beginning in 2019. The news organizations published blockbuster reports based on the trove of data, showing how Trump and the wealthiest Americans employed financial strategies to slash their federal tax bills, in some cases down to zero. At a plea hearing Thursday, Littlejohn admitted he leaked Trump's tax returns to the Times, which published articles based on the data in the months before the 2020 election. The returns of other wealthy individuals, including tech billionaires Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, became the basis of reports in ProPublica, analyzing how the richest Americans managed to evade the federal government's tax bite. Bezos owns the Washington Post. The unprecedented leak of Americans' confidential financial data renewed a debate in Congress about tax policy amid historic levels of income inequality, and served as an X-ray into Trump's secretive finances after years in which he waged legal battles to protect their confidentiality. U.S. District Judge Aneth C. Reyes rebuked Littlejohn several times from the bench and said whatever ends he had could not justify his means. "I cannot overstate how troubled I am by what occurred," Reyes said. After an attorney for Trump, Alina Habba, delivered a statement in court calling for the maximum prison sentence of 5 years for Littlejohn, the judge said, "I agree completely that people taking the law into their own hands is unacceptable. It doesn't matter who the person is who was the victim of a crime," Reyes said, before mentioning Trump by name and telling Habba that the former president could come deliver his own statement at Littlejohn's sentencing, set for January 29. "Everyone can be well assured that there will be serious consequences for this illegal act," Reyes said. In a news release, the Justice Department said Littlejohn tried to hide his tracks and saved the tax returns to multiple personal storage devices before contacting one of the media outlets. After sending a second batch of tax return information to another news organization, Littlejohn then obstructed the forthcoming investigation into his conduct by deleting and destroying evidence of his disclosures, the Justice Department said. By using his role as a government contractor to gain access to private tax information, steal that information, and disclose it publicly, Charles Littlejohn broke federal law and betrayed the public's trust, Attorney General Merrick Garland said in a statement. Littlejohn's attorney, Lisa Manning, declined to comment after the hearing. Speaking on behalf of Trump, Habba urged the Justice Department to investigate whether Littlejohn acted alone or in concert with others. She called the Trump-related leak an atrocity and an egregious breach by an agent of the IRS, for political gain. Littlejohn worked for a private company performing contract work for the IRS, according to federal prosecutors. Neither the Justice Department nor Littlejohn's defense has identified the company. The Times report, Habba noted, was published in September 2020, months before Trump lost re-election to Joe Biden. Habba said Trump probably lost thousands of votes because of the leak. In its article on Trump, the Times said, all of the information the Times obtained was provided by sources with legal access to it. Charlie Stadlander, a Times spokesman, said in an email Thursday night, "We remain concerned when whistleblowers who provide information in the public interest are prosecuted." The Times' reporting on this topic played an important role in helping the public understand the financial ties and tax strategies of a sitting president, information that has long been seen as central to the knowledge that voters should have about the leader of our government and the candidates for that high office. In a court filing, federal prosecutors from the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section said only a subset of the thousands of leaked tax returns, covering at least 152 victims, had been published by the media as a result of the charged unauthorized disclosure. ProPublica is not disclosing how it obtained the data, which was given to us in raw form, with no conditions or conclusions, the news organization said in one report. In another, the media outlet added, "We do not know the identity of our source. We did not solicit the information they sent us." A spokesperson for ProPublica declined to comment Thursday. Reyes noted that the House Committee on Ways and Means had obtained 5 years of Trump's tax returns, covering 2015 to 2020, after prevailing in a years-long legal battle that began under a different judge in the same D.C. courthouse. "This is how we do things in this country. We have laws," Reyes said. "And a court decides what is permitted and what is not permitted." Illegal disclosures such as Littlejohn's could imperil the government's ability to collect taxes, if individuals can't trust their financials will be kept confidential, the judge said. Under federal law, the Justice Department usually would be required to notify each victim of a crime individually. But prosecutors said in a court filing that the large number of potential crime victims in this case makes it impracticable to notify them on an individualized basis, and the judge granted their request to publish mass notices instead on a Justice Department website. Spencer S. Sue and Devlin Barrett contributed to this report. 17 FLA officers accused of stealing nearly $500,000 in COVID relief funds. In November 2021, the Broward Sheriff's Office in Florida received a tip from one of its deputies, claiming that their colleagues may have committed fraud to get loans from a federal pandemic relief fund. The tip led officials to a raft of falsified IRS tax forms, business records, and loan applications submitted by Broward deputies, federal officials in South Florida announced Thursday. In total, officers fraudulently obtained nearly $500,000 from the Paycheck Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program intended to provide relief during the global pandemic, investigators said. 17 Broward deputies were charged with wire fraud as a result of the investigation, according to federal and local officials. 8 work in law enforcement for the sheriff's office, and 9 work in the office's Department of Detention, according to a sheriff's office's news release. 2 sergeants were among those charged. The wave of indictments is one of the largest to hit a South Florida agency since the 1980s, the South Florida Sun-Sentinel reported. We were not going to leave one stone unturned and provide an opportunity for an employee to violate their oath and create embarrassment for this organization, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney said. The Broward Sheriff's Office did not respond to a request for comment Thursday night. Court records and news reports do not identify attorneys for many of the accused deputies, and attempts to reach most of them directly were unsuccessful. The Broward Deputy Sheriff's Association, which represents law enforcement deputies in the county, said in a statement that it was aware of the investigation but did not comment directly on the allegations. Employees and all citizens are entitled to and shall receive due process through the court system, the union said. Brian Silber, an attorney representing 2 indicted deputies, said in an email that there's more to the stories than what is being presented. Jude Faxedomo, an attorney representing a detention deputy charged with 2 counts of wire fraud, asserted that the indictments are misleading. Many of these deputies have legitimate side businesses for which they applied for the loan, Faxedomo said in a statement. More importantly, many relied on persons misrepresenting themselves as legitimate experts in PPP loans who prepared and submitted the applications on their behalf. Those people should be the government's real target. Some detention deputies last week contacted the Federation of Public and Private Employees, a union that protects detention deputies in Broward County, after they lost their guns, badges, and uniforms amid suspensions, the Sun-Sentinel reported. The majority of detention deputies are hardworking, good people, Tony Marciano, a business representative for the union, told the newspaper. People make mistakes. The deputies charged did not commit the alleged fraud in the course of their official duties, U.S. Attorney Mackenzie LaPointe said at a news conference Thursday. But he stressed the severity of defrauding the oft-exploited emergency government relief programs and said federal investigators would continue to pursue those who took advantage of it. There is a reckoning, LaPointe said. The cases represent the latest charges brought against people accused of misappropriating COVID relief funds. The government struggled to track the trillions of dollars it distributed during the pandemic in hopes of helping small businesses, unemployed workers, and families in need, a Washington Post investigation found. Fraudsters stole identities to obtain cash, while some politicians used the funds for projects unrelated to the pandemic, the Post has reported. Companies that didn't need extra funding found loopholes to acquire government funds. According to court documents, the Broward officers received fraudulent loans by submitting false information about their payrolls, gross revenue or income of personal companies, and IRS tax returns. Some officers then allegedly sought forgiveness for their loans. LaPointe said when he learned of the level of alleged fraud happening in the same office, my first reaction was, there must have been some sort of conspiracy. But LaPointe said there was no evidence of a coordinated effort among the charged officers. The coincidence probably spoke to the vulnerability of large-scale relief programs to be targeted by bad actors, he said. When you have a federal program that's being offered to provide relief to a large number of people, you are always going to have opportunistic individuals who are going to try to take advantage of it, LaPointe said. Tony, the sheriff, said the charged officers would receive due process before being disciplined but indicated that they would not remain with the sheriff's office. At the end of the day, they will be gone, Tony said. If they're being criminally charged, there's no place for this in this organization. Biden re-election effort raises $71 million for third quarter. The president extends his advantage over Republican rivals, while falling short of his predecessors at this point in the campaign. President Biden's campaign announced raising $71 million in the third fundraising quarter of the year, giving him a significant advantage over the current Republican field while falling short of the inflation-adjusted hauls of Barack Obama and Donald Trump at the same point in their re-election efforts. Incumbent presidents hold significant advantages in the off year of their re-election bids, as typically they alone can raise money in large checks from wealthy donors in partnership with national and state parties. Sums as large as $929,000 are permitted in the case of Biden's effort. By comparison, the Trump campaign has said it raised $45.5 million during the same period this year, while the campaign of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, raised $15 million. Biden's $71 million haul includes money from his campaign, the Democratic National Committee and 3 joint fundraising committees, which can all be used to support Biden's re-election effort. Biden campaign officials, who raised $72 million in the second quarter, briefed reporters on some parts of the fundraising results ahead of their official filings with the Federal Election Commission Sunday night. They declined to break out how much money went directly to the campaign or how much money the affiliated groups spent between July and September, information that will become public in filings Sunday night. A Biden advisor said that from April to June, the grassroots fundraising program made up about 1/3 of the entire amount raised. Between July to September, 49% of revenue came from the grassroots program. A Biden team member said that number outperformed expectations of about 36% to 37% coming from the smaller dollar program in the third quarter. We are especially proud of our efforts to exponentially grow our grassroots donor base, now having over 100,000 Americans signed up to donate on a recurring basis from now until Election Day, campaign manager Judy Chavez Rodriguez said in a statement. These numbers are a testament to one of our core objectives early in this campaign: raise the resources needed to run an aggressive campaign that will win in November 2024. Biden's campaign advisors said they had more than 493,000 donors making 843,000 donations during the quarter. The campaign said that they have over 240,000 donors this cycle who did not give any money to Biden in his 2020 race. One promotional effort to sell dark Brandon color-changing mugs, with an image of Biden that switches when filled with a hot beverage from wearing sunglasses to showing red laser eyes, raised $2 million since August, the campaign said. The meme is a pro-Biden twist on the Let's Go Brandon theme used by Republicans, which refers to an anti-Biden chant that was misheard by a reporter. Separate fundraising contests to meet Biden or Obama raised $2.5 million. The Biden haul roughly matches the $70.1 million that Obama raised during the same period in 2011, but falls short in inflation-adjusted terms. To have the same spending power as $70.1 million in 2011, Biden and his allies would need to raise $95 million in today's dollars, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Biden campaign team said their cash on hand of the various committees at the end of the quarter, $91 million, was higher than the $76 million that the Obama campaign had in the bank at the same point in his re-election effort. In inflation-adjusted terms, Obama had slightly more spending power at the same point in his campaign. Trump raised $125 million in the third quarter of 2019, which holds a buying power of about $149.5 million in today's dollars. But Biden campaign advisors suggested that they are not repeating the aggressive spending tactics that Trump employed at that point in his campaign to raise money. Biden has opted to build a smaller campaign operation in the first months of his re-election effort, while investing more than either Trump or Obama in paid advertising, with a $25 million advertising budget between August and December, most of which is being paid for directly by the campaign. The gossip, chatter, angst, beltway cable talking heads are once again misunderstanding and underestimating Joe Biden, said Jeffrey Katzenberg, a co-chair of the Biden campaign. You cannot deny the power of 840,000 people at this moment in time showing up in a real way and financially supporting and backing his re-election. Ron DeSantis is still running for president. There are 3 situations in which a poker player might go all in. One is that she has such a good hand that she's confident no one else can take the pot. A second is when the player wants the others at the table to think she has that good a hand, so she bluffs. And then there's the third, when she runs out of chips to play. Maybe Florida Governor Ron DeSantis's big push for the Iowa caucuses, reported on Wednesday, is a bluff. Maybe it's an effort to suggest more strength than is apparent externally. It pretty clearly isn't because DeSantis has a particularly good hand there, or anywhere else, really. Polling in the state consistently shows him down at least 20 points and not gaining ground. Or maybe it's just the only chips he has left. There have been recent opportunities for DeSantis to reshape the GOP nominating contest. Over the course of the past 6 weeks, the Republican Party has hosted 2 primetime debates, with millions of people tuning in. The day before the first debate, DeSantis had the support of about 15% of the likely primary voter pool in 538's average of polls. A week after the debate, he sat at 15%. But then came the second debate, about a month after the first one. On the day of the debate, DeSantis was at 14%. A week later, he is still at 14%. If math isn't your thing, allow me to crunch the numbers. DeSantis has lost 1 percentage point since the day before the first debate. That didn't blunt the enthusiasm his team offered for Wednesday's news. The campaign announced that it had raised $15 million in the third quarter, a significant fundraising haul that shuts down the doubters who counted out Ron DeSantis for far too long, campaign manager James Uthmere said in a statement. But only $5 million of that can be used for the primary, which is a significant limitation. Perhaps the doubters still have some cause to raise doubts? The outside PAC that's aiding DeSantis, more than such PACs normally do, in fact, collected as much as $20 million in additional fundraising, according to reporting from the Dispatch. Maybe it's lowballing those estimates to overperform once the numbers are reported publicly, but the Dispatch also had DeSantis's team coming in right at $15 million. Perhaps you remember, though, that PAC's exhortations right before the first debate. It needed $50 million before the end of September, potential donors were told, according to the New York Times, with DeSantis needing to beat Trump in the next 60 days while distancing himself from rivals immediately. If I might again serve as your personal calculator, $20 million is substantially less than $50 million. I will also note that DeSantis has not obviously beaten Trump, though it's not really clear what that meant. This hasn't stopped the Trump campaign from giddily emailing reporters with its kiss of death countdown, running out the clock until 60 days pass. It is clear, though, that DeSantis has very much not separated from the rest of the field. In mid-August, he was leading business executive Vivek Ramaswamy by 7 points. Now, he leads former ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley by 6 points. Haley was the only candidate to gain much ground after the first debate, though not enough to move into second place. She has ticked up more since the second one, too. A poll conducted by Suffolk University for the Boston Globe and USA Today put her in second place in New Hampshire for the first time, usurping the position held in most polls by a certain Florida governor. She's not threatening Trump to any significant degree, but she's also not getting kiss of death countdowns. Trump, meanwhile, is calling for his party to just skip the debates and admit he's going to be the nominee. So DeSantis is pushing his chips to Iowa. Several of his staffers in Tallahassee will be relocated to the state as the governor aims for an early upset that, maybe, finally, could shake up the race. Maybe, DeSantis hopes, he can repeat the successes notched by past Iowa caucus winners, including Ted Cruz in 2016, Rick Santorum in 2012 and Mike Huckabee in 2008. At the very least, the Times wrote, he hopes to perhaps show that Trump is beatable, useful given that DeSantis's long-standing Trump is an electoral loser pitch has been hard to defend when the former president is up by 30 points in the polls. There is, of course, another thing that losing poker players can do, rather than go all in. they can fold and cash out what they have left. How Republicans lauded RFK Jr. before he was a threat. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced Monday that he would end his primary challenge to President Biden and instead run for the White House as an independent. And with the announcement, not only did a long-running GOP effort to elevate him in the service of embarrassing Biden go up in smoke, but Kennedy now appears to pose a potential spoiler threat by taking more votes from former President Donald Trump than Biden. What has resulted is a remarkable turnabout in how Republicans and the right talk about Kennedy. In recent days, the Republican National Committee has called Kennedy just another radical, far-left Democrat while detailing 23 reasons Republicans should oppose him. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel said Kennedy is a typical elitist liberal, and voters won't be fooled. And Trump's campaign made it even clearer that it fears a potential spoiler candidacy from Kennedy, who is much more popular with Republicans than Democrats. Voters should not be deceived by anyone who pretends to have conservative values, Trump spokesman Stephen Chung said in a statement. He added that an RFK candidacy is nothing more than a vanity project for a liberal Kennedy to cash in on his family's name. This is a far cry from how the right, and even Trump himself, once talked about Kennedy. And to the extent MAGA voters are fooled into thinking he's one of them, Republicans will have themselves to blame. While Republicans are now pitching Kennedy as an opportunist and a radical, Trump in late June vouched for Kennedy's character and common sense. He's a very smart guy, and a good guy, Trump said, adding, he's a very good man, and his heart is in the right place. He's a common sense guy, and so am I, Trump said. So, whether you're conservative or liberal, common sense is common sense. While they now suggest Kennedy should be persona non grata for conservative voters, key Trump-aligned strategists, including Stephen K. Bannon and Roger Stone, have pushed Kennedy as a possible running mate for Trump. Stone in April called a Trump-Kennedy ticket a dream ticket, while Bannon said 2 months ago that it would lead to a massive landslide in Trump's favor. Bannon even called Kennedy's more liberal views irrelevant in the broader context. I understand that he doesn't have policies on life and guns that are absolutely perfect and aligned with MAGA, there's no doubt about that, but he's talking about the central issues facing the country, as Donald Trump is, and that's why the other stuff is irrelevant, Bannon said in June, referring to Trump's Make America Great Again motto. This is how Republicans often talked about Kennedy, acknowledging the ways in which he is out of step with the GOP but playing down the significance of that. The other leading contender for the Republican presidential nomination, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, acknowledged those political differences in late July. But he also said he might appoint Kennedy to a key position at the Food and Drug Administration or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Another candidate who has made inroads with MAGA Republicans, Vivek Ramaswamy, has also floated Kennedy as his possible running mate. And Bannon and Stone have hardly been the only conservative media influencers to sing Kennedy's praises. When Kennedy launched his campaign in April, then Fox News host Tucker Carlson also vouched for Kennedy's character and alignment with the MAGA movement on the most important issues. Bobby Kennedy himself is not extreme. He is deeply insightful, and above all he is honest, Carlson said, adding, we're not Democrats, but Bobby Kennedy is one of the most remarkable people we have ever met, and we are honored to have him on our show. While the Trump campaign now calls Kennedy's campaign a vanity project, Carlson assured of Kennedy, he's not running to get rich. He's trying to make things better. House Republicans also invited Kennedy to testify in July, an extraordinary invitation for a current presidential candidate, and promoted him as a serious combatant in the battle against censorship. It's why Mr. Kennedy is running for president, to help us expose and stop what's going on, said Representative Jim Jordan, Republican, Ohio, now a top GOP candidate to become House Speaker. Representative Chip Roy, Republican, Texas, added while introducing Kennedy, it is for this that Mr. Kennedy finds himself receiving the scorn of both the political left and right because if one dares challenge the orthodoxy of the powers that be, then one is their enemy. It was around that time that the right's sudden interest in Kennedy did prove too much for at least one Republican congresswoman. Shortly before the hearing, none other than Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, GA, stepped forward to urge her party to slow its roll in embracing him. So I agree with Bobby Kennedy on a lot of things, she said, citing his position on vaccines and the CIA, but I tell you what, I think there's a lot of Republicans that have been fooled by him. He's not a Republican, everyone. He's very much a Democrat. Now he's an independent. And a lot of Republicans are probably wishing they had heeded Green's advice earlier. Sean Hannity's predictable heel turn on RFK Jr. Once upon a time, it seemed that Sean Hannity was excited about no presidential candidate more than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In June, the Fox News host marveled that Kennedy was surging in the Democratic primary, potentially meaning that President Biden's bid for renomination was in jeopardy. Kennedy wasn't surging in the polls, at least not among Democrats, but Hannity seemed perfectly happy to try to will such a surge into existence. In late July, he turned over a full hour of his program to Kennedy, the sort of campaign contribution that he normally reserved for Republican candidates, as he did so often before last year's midterm elections. Kennedy was running against a Democrat, and that was good enough for Hannity. So he welcomed Kennedy to a town hall in front of a live audience, though the only one asking questions was Sean Hannity. Those questions were no less pointed than the ones 2022 Republican candidates faced. Kennedy's challenge to Biden was framed in near-heroic terms, positioning the conspiracy theory enthusiast as the sole person brave enough to challenge the Democratic establishment. Many of his fellow Democrats and others in the media mob, make no mistake, they are right now furious with RFK Jr., Hannity said as he was introducing his guest. They seem to loathe his stance on medical freedom and privacy, a sanitization of Kennedy's anti-vaccine stance. They are angry he does not toe the party line on the war in Ukraine and former President Donald Trump. They can't seem to stand that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a free thinker with classic liberal principles. And today, well, today's Democratic Party is about compliance. It's about going along. It's about groupthink. So Hannity was happy to provide a soapbox. About 2.2 million people tuned into Hannity's program that night, about in line with Hannity's regular weeknight audience. They heard Hannity tee up a number of issues on which he could express agreement, from economic insecurity to the effort to sideline hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19. Hannity made clear his welcoming intent at the outset. "We definitely don't agree on everything," he said, "but that's not my role here tonight. We're not going to shut down Robert F. Kennedy Jr." He noted that some people wanted to deplatform Kennedy because he regularly spreads misinformation about vaccine safety, though Hannity didn't mention that. "I actually believe in freedom and freedom of speech and the freedom of the American people to hear things that they may disagree with and ascertain and determine for themselves whether they agree or don't agree," Hannity solemnly stated. Then Kennedy announced that he would run not as a Democrat against Biden but as an independent, against both Biden and whoever wins the Republican nomination for president. That almost certainly means running against Hannity's friend Donald Trump. It also may mean pulling more support from Trump than from Biden, which is very much not what Hannity or other Republicans would like to see. So, when Kennedy again joined Hannity on Tuesday night, he earned a much briefer and colder reception. "Everybody is now trying to analyze, whether there's a three-way race with you, Donald Trump and Joe Biden," Hannity said as he began his interview. "Who would you more likely draw from? So I hope you don't mind, but I did a little research on you. You're pretty liberal," he continued. "You've called for curbing logging, oil drilling, fracking. You wanted to eliminate it and call it a victory for democracy. You want to curb U.S. fossil fuel extraction, keep it in the ground. You once tweeted you want a ban on fossil fuel extraction, a ban on fracking. You called the NRA once a terror group. You supported over the years Democrats, Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton. You praised Bernie Sanders multiple times. You support affirmative action. So why is this party of yours, why didn't they even allow you to compete? Because that's as pretty liberal of a record as anybody I know." Kennedy responded to this unsubtle line of questioning with a chuckle, noting that Hannity didn't really ask any question. "Do you want to talk about my positions, Sean?" he asked, "or do you want to read talking points from the Trump campaign?" "Excuse me," Hannity replied. "These are called Hannity points. I do my own research. This is certainly possible in theory. But it is true that, on Tuesday, the Republican National Committee published a list of Kennedy's positions intended to frame him as unacceptably liberal. The list included most of the assertions Hannity presented in introducing his guest. It's also the case that Kennedy's announcement had already triggered Republican condemnation. Last week, Semaphore reported on the Trump campaign's preparations to undercut the independent. Kennedy can be forgiven for drawing that line. At times, Hannity's prosecution of Kennedy on Tuesday was almost revelatory, a glimpse of what might be possible in a world where Hannity didn't dedicate his show night after night to aiding Trump or Trump's party. Do you still believe the NRA is a terror group? Hannity asked, for example. I support the Second Amendment, Kennedy replied, like I do all the amendments in the Constitution. I didn't ask you if you support the Second Amendment, Hannity firmly interjected. In 2018, you said Parkland students are right, the NRA's a terror group. Do you believe that? I don't consider the NRA a terror group, Kennedy replied, seemingly chastened. The segment ended with Hannity and Kennedy sparring over the feasibility of replacing fossil fuels, with Hannity insisting that Kennedy's claims weren't true, something that it's hard to imagine him saying during a Trump interview. But, then, Hannity's interviews are focused on helping Trump, not hurting him. It's understandable that Kennedy would want to do Hannity's show, given the uphill task he faces in winning the presidency. But it's surprising that he wouldn't have been prepared for a very different reception from Hannity now that he'll probably be running against Hannity's friend.